Lately, my husband Kevin had started bringing me a full glass of cold-pressed juice every day, claiming it was to boost my vitamin C. Because it was always too acidic for my stomach, I usually handed it off to his secretary. 1 week later, that same secretary started screaming in the middle of the open-plan office. The entire company was thrown into chaos, and my husband stood frozen on the spot. That afternoon, right around the time the setting sun cast its glow through the large windows of my Los Angeles office, Kevin quietly opened the door and walked in. In his hand was a glass of golden juice, as clear as honey, with cold condensation dripping down the sides. My eyes were glued to an unfinished architectural blueprint, and my head was pounding from dozens of technical documents. "I just made this," he said in his usual gentle voice. "Drink up. I put extra orange and mango in it today. You need plenty of vitamins for healthy skin." I looked up and smiled at him, but my eyes lingered on the glass for a fraction of a second. The color was too vibrant, almost artificial. Leaning in, I took a breath. The fruity aroma was strong, but beneath it lurked a strange scent. It was a very subtle, sharp smell, like metal mixed with acid. My heart pounded fiercely. "What is it?" he asked, observing me with a piercing gaze. "Nothing," I made an excuse. "Maybe my sense of smell is just overly sensitive lately from staring at the computer too long." This was the 7th consecutive day. His juice-making for me was a ritual performed with almost religious punctuality. Kevin was a renowned vice president at a major Century City investment firm, and I was the CEO of an interior design company. We had been married for 5 years. To outsiders, he was the perfect husband. He was attentive, meticulous, and always worried about whether his wife was staying hydrated and eating properly. The problem was that I suffered from chronic acid reflux. Citrus was torture for me. On the first day, just one sip sent a sharp pain through my teeth and made my throat burn. From the next day on, under his watchful eye, I forced myself to take a tiny sip and secretly poured the rest away. Today was no different. Just looking at the shimmering glass made my stomach ache. "Drink it before the vitamins break down," Kevin urged, his voice gentle, but leaving no room for refusal. I picked up the glass and pretended to bring it to my lips. Right at that moment, my cell phone buzzed. It was a call from my assistant, confirming a morning meeting for the next day. I used the opportunity to set the glass down on the table, and while talking on the phone, I casually slid it toward the edge, completely out of my line of sight. After finishing the call, I pretended to be fully engrossed in the design, pointing out details that needed revision. He immediately forgot about the juice and leaned in to discuss the work with me. When he left, the glass remained untouched in the corner of the desk. That afternoon, when I arrived at my own company's office, I had somehow brought the glass of juice with me. Perhaps I simply could not bear to throw away what was supposed to be a token of my husband's love. As I walked past the shared workspace, his secretary, Chloe, stood up to greet me. Chloe was very young and beautiful, having just graduated from college a few years ago, but she was highly efficient and well-liked by everyone. I had noticed for a long time that the way she looked at Kevin was not just the look of a subordinate. I smiled and offered her the glass. "Chloe, Kevin made this juice for me, but my stomach has been acting up. It feels like a waste to throw it away, so if you would like it, it is yours." Chloe's eyes lit up. She took the glass with both hands as if receiving a treasure. "Of course. Thank you so much. Any juice made by the vice president must be delicious." I smiled without saying a word. Through the glass walls of my private office, I watched her pop the lid and chug it all at once with an expression of pure joy. At that moment, for some reason, my heart beat irregularly, and an indescribable, strange sensation spread through my chest. From that day on, it became a habit. Kevin continued to make me juice every morning, and I always found an excuse to hand it over to Chloe. She accepted it happily without the slightest suspicion, even joking about it. "I might just get addicted to the boss's juice if I keep drinking it." Kevin knew about this, but he only laughed. It was as if he found it amusing to have gained a loyal new customer. Everything proceeded incredibly normally, with absolutely no warning signs. Until noon a week later. I was in a video conference with a client when a high-pitched, agonizing scream shattered the silence. The sound pierced through the glass walls, so sharp it made my blood run cold. We had to pause the meeting. Opening my door and stepping out, the sight before me almost made my legs give out. Chloe was standing in the middle of the office. Her face was deathly pale, her hair a tangled mess. She screamed incessantly, smashing desks and chairs with uncontrollable strength. Computer monitors crashed to the floor and shattered. Paper fluttered through the air like a snowstorm. She stared at her own arms and screamed in terror. Something is crawling inside me. Stay away, stay away. She violently slapped and scratched at her own body as if something vile was truly slithering under her skin. My colleagues were paralyzed with fear, and no one dared to approach her. Someone called building security and 911. Kevin rushed out of his private office. When he saw the frantic, hysterical Chloe, I saw it clearly. The look in his eyes was not concern or pity. What flashed for a split second was deep, suppressed panic. A cold chill ran down my spine. The paramedics arrived, restrained the still screaming, thrashing Chloe on a stretcher, and took her away. The office was enveloped in chaos and suffocating terror. Once things had calmed down slightly, I returned to my office and closed the door. That was when I saw it. Sitting on the corner of Chloe's desk was an empty juice bottle, exactly like the one I received every morning. My hands trembled. Too many puzzle pieces were starting to come together in a cold, horrifying picture. A week ago, I was the one supposed to drink that juice. Today, I was the one who was supposed to go crazy. That night, Kevin came home very early. He cooked dinner, cleaned the house, and repeatedly asked how I was doing. Following the horrifying incident at the office, he was playing the role of the perfect, overly concerned husband. The doctor says Chloe suffered a severe nervous breakdown, he said with absolute, chilling composure. It might be work stress, do not overthink it. I nodded, pretending to believe him. During dinner, he asked suddenly, have you been feeling overly tired or having headaches lately? My heart seized at the question. I looked at him and smiled, acting slightly exhausted. Yeah, probably just because of work. His gaze lingered on me longer than usual, and something unspeakable flickered in his eyes. That night, I turned my back to him and lay awake in the dark with my eyes wide open. The image of Chloe screaming, terrified of invisible creatures, replayed in my head on an endless loop. Cold sweat soaked my back. From that day forward, I knew my seemingly perfect marriage had officially entered the realm of shadows. I also knew I could no longer pretend not to see anything. I spent almost that entire night sleepless. Beside me, Kevin breathed softly, occasionally letting out a quiet snore, sleeping soundly with his back turned to me. The dim light from the bedside lamp cast a warm line across his back, radiating a peace that suggested everything was perfectly fine. In the past, that sight would have comforted me. I would have hugged him from behind and rested my head against his back, seeking solace after a long day. But now, all I felt was ice. In my mind, the image of Chloe screaming in the office and the empty juice bottle on her desk spun around dizzily. I tried to reason with myself. I was overthinking. It was just fruit juice. Who would deliberately put something dangerous into a drink they lovingly prepared for their wife every morning? But then another question surfaced, quietly and sharp as a knife. If nothing was wrong, why had I smelled that metallic scent myself? If it was just work stress, why was Chloe the only one who lost her mind? And why did such a horrific coincidence occur the exact same week I started giving her my drinks? I slowly sat up in bed. In the gloom, I studied Kevin's face. A face I had once trusted completely. A place I thought would be my lifelong sanctuary. There was a faint crease on his forehead, as if some worry chased him even in his dreams. Suddenly, I remembered the times he helped me sign paperwork. Times he advised me on my company's corporate contracts. When we discussed our assets, he had said, "Let me handle these stock portfolios so you do not take a loss." Thinking back on it now, words that once felt as light as the wind felt as heavy as stone. The next morning, Kevin did not bring juice into my room as usual. He merely poked his head through the door, asked about my schedule for the day, advised me not to dwell on the office incident, and hurriedly left. I felt a wave of relief, but a new wave of anxiety immediately washed over me. Did he skip the juice because he was busy? Or because he had a new target, meaning he now had to change his strategy? When I got to the company, the entire floor was still weighed down by a heavy atmosphere. People whispered and avoided eye contact whenever Chloe's name came up. A normal young woman going completely insane at work was terrifying for everyone. I opened the door to my office, but did not sit down right away. My eyes unconsciously drifted toward Chloe's workspace. Her desk had been quickly cleared, her monitor replaced. Everything was clean and orderly, as if the storm had never happened. I was the only one who knew that a specific juice bottle had once been sitting there. At lunch, while everyone went down to the cafeteria, I pretended to make a phone call, stepped out, and walked around Chloe's desk. I crouched down and opened her empty drawers. I quickly peeked into her trash can, but there were only a few crumpled papers and tissues. I bit my lip and walked away, as if nothing had happened. But a very clear resolution had already formed in my mind. If I could not find that day's bottle, I had to find another one. A forgotten bottle of the juice Kevin made. That afternoon, I called someone I had not reached out to in a long time. Emily, my college roommate, who was now an attending physician at a major metropolitan hospital. That evening, I told Kevin I had a dinner meeting with a client for an interior design project, and would be home late. He did not suspect a thing. Drive safe. Do not speed. Call me if anything happens, he said affectionately. I nodded, grabbed my purse, and quietly left the house. Inside my purse, right next to my phone and wallet, was something else. A clean, small glass vial, waiting to be filled. I did not go meet any clients. I drove aimlessly until I was certain I was not being followed, then pulled into a quiet cafe near the hospital. I waited there until my phone buzzed. You can come up now. I am on the night shift. Emily's voice was as calm as ever. In Emily's small office, I sat across from her, my hands clasped tightly together. I realized I had not even taken off my coat, and my palms were sweating despite the air conditioning. What is going on? Talk to me, Emily said, looking at me with the professionalism of a doctor and the warmth of an old friend. I hesitated for a moment, but finally spoke. Emily. If someone mixed a lethal drug into fruit juice, could drinking it consecutively for several days cause neurological damage, panic, and hallucinations? Can you run an analysis on it for me? Emily frowned. What do you mean? Did you drink it? I shook my head, deflecting the question. I am not sure. I just smelled something strange. But the person who drank it for a few days went crazy in the middle of our office. I cannot believe it is just a coincidence. Emily stayed silent for a moment. She seemed to see right through my words and the fake mask of composure I was trying to maintain. Did you bring something? She asked. Finally, I opened my purse, took out the small glass vial, and placed it on the table. My voice was completely dry. Please help me. If possible, I will bring you a sample of the actual juice next time. I know this is terrifying, but I cannot trust anyone anymore. Emily put on a pair of gloves, picked up the vial, held it up to the light to examine it, and then set it back down. All right. But you need to understand one thing. If this is a common narcotic, the analysis is easy. But if it is a rare substance, untraceable, or in trace amounts, it could be extremely difficult. I will still do everything I can. And one more thing, she said, looking straight into my eyes. While you wait for the results, listen to me carefully. Do not eat or drink anything you did not prepare yourself. Even if it is served by your own family. He gave a bitter smile. What you just said is exactly what I fear the most. Emily pulled her chair closer, placed her hands over mine, and squeezed gently. You have always been a deeply rational person. For you to be this suspicious means you have more than just a hunch in your heart. I will not force you to tell me who you suspect or talk about your marriage. But if it is the person you live with, you need to be twice as calm and collected as usual. Do not show them anything. I nodded, feeling a heavy lump in my throat. I realized then how lonely I had been my entire life. Since getting married, I rarely saw my friends, and I hardly shared my true feelings with anyone. Everything was summarized in a few brief words. I am good. Work is fine. Things are normal. I was discovering that normal had many layers. The normal seen from the outside, and the normal rotting from the inside. After leaving the hospital, I did not head straight home. I drove slowly down familiar streets. The road leading to the first apartment we rented after getting married. The street where Kevin took me out for breakfast every weekend. The bridge where he held me in the rain when I was upset over trivial things. The man in my memories was patient, considerate, an excellent listener, and a man who knew how to wait. Could that man possibly be the same person lacing his wife's daily juice with something sinister? I did not want to believe it. But the image of Chloe screaming would not leave my mind. When I arrived home, Kevin was sitting on the living room sofa. The television was on, but the volume was incredibly low. He stood up when he saw me. Why are you back so late? The client was very demanding, I said with a weak smile, slipping off my shoes. You know how it is. We had to go over a bunch of extra details, so it dragged on. He walked closer to me and frowned when he caught the faint smell of antiseptic lingering on my jacket sleeve. Did you go to a hospital? I froze for just a fraction of a second. Just a fraction, but I knew a calculating man like him would notice. Yes, I stopped by to visit an acquaintance admitted nearby. Do not worry, I am perfectly fine, I said quickly. Kevin stared at me for a few seconds, then smiled without asking any further questions. He went to the kitchen and came back with a glass of warm milk. Drink this so you can sleep well. You have not been resting enough lately. I stared at the glass of milk. The first thought that popped into my head was wondering what was inside it. Instantly, I felt violently sick to my stomach. Married for years, and now everything my husband handed me felt like a booby trap. I kept my voice casual. I just had coffee with the client. If I drink milk now, it might upset my stomach. I will pass for tonight. He did not push it, just nodded. All right. If you are tired, go on up to bed. That night, Kevin slept soundly once again. I lay in the dark with my hand over my stomach, listening to my heart pounding so hard it hurt my ears. In the dead of night, one single thought emerged with terrifying clarity. If he truly wanted to harm me, I had been living in danger this whole time without even knowing it. 2 days later, I received a brief text from Emily. Come by this afternoon. We need to talk. It is important. I used a client meeting as an excuse once more. Kevin raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. In his mind, I was probably just a wife exhausted from work and a bit overly sensitive after the shock at the office, still very much under his control. I arrived at Emily's office. Her expression was much more severe than before. She did not beat around the bush. Because the sample was small and not drawn directly from the affected person's system, I cannot be 100% certain. But in the residue I managed to isolate, there were traces of a specific neurotoxin. The dosage was minuscule, but if ingested over a long period, the probability of it causing severe psychiatric disorders, paranoia, insomnia, and extreme hyperreactivity is incredibly high. I felt my legs give way. If not for the chair, I would have collapsed. Emily continued, her voice heavy. This is not the kind of medication you can buy at a pharmacy. Its origins are deeply tied to the black market. It usually only shows up in highly restricted research or dark web circles. I think you understand what I am implying. I stared at her, my eyes burning, but I could not cry. Emily, what would happen if someone intentionally drugged their wife with this, and once she started showing symptoms, he took her to a psychiatrist and spun a few stories? Emily did not answer immediately. As a medical professional, she knew exactly what would happen. Finally, she spoke quietly and distinctly, emphasizing every word. The woman could be involuntarily committed, and the husband would have the grounds to petition for full conservatorship over her. At that exact moment, every single puzzle piece snapped together in my mind. The morning juice. The crease between his eyebrows when I said I could not drink it. The juice conveniently ending up with Chloe. The fleeting look of absolute panic Kevin showed before remasking his face with calm composure. Everything formed one complete picture. A calculated plot to turn his wife into a lunatic. I sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the air conditioning, the sound of Emily's pen lightly tapping the desk, and the destructive pounding of my own heart. Outside, traffic kept flowing, and life moved on. But for me, from that moment onward, there was no turning back. I either let Kevin lead me like a docile sheep to the slaughter he had prepared, or I had to become smarter, colder, and more ruthless than him. Please keep all of this safe for me, I finally said in a low voice. If there ever comes a day when I cannot speak for myself, give these results to the police. Even if by then I am deemed a psychiatric patient or a madwoman. Emily looked at me in silence, then nodded. Her hands covered mine once again, gripping them tighter than before. When I left the hospital, I looked up at the cloudy California sky. It looked like it was going to rain. The wind blew my hair back. It was freezing, but it cleared my mind. The image of Kevin resurfaced, along with the phrase he always used whenever he signed financial documents in my name. Do not worry. I will take care of everything. I bit my lip. Yes, he was taking care of things. A little too eagerly. He wanted to take care of the rest of my life, my assets, and my future with a simple glass of juice. But starting today, he would not be the only one handling things. I was going to set up my own game. And in this game, I could not afford to lose. From that day on, I began living two parallel lives. On the surface, I remained Kevin's perfectly normal wife. I went to work in the morning, came home for dinner, and ate the meals he prepared. I listened to his stories about the office and occasionally smiled to keep the peace. I let him hug me, let him ask how I was doing, and let him place a comforting hand on my shoulder whenever I looked deep in thought. But on the inside, I had built a silent, icy, and impenetrable wall. I observed his every gesture and every word from a safe distance. Kevin no longer forced the juice on me, but he began trying other things. Soups, herbal teas, plant-based milks, and even vitamin supplements. You look incredibly frail. You have lost a lot of weight lately, he would say, looking at me with worried eyes. Probably just the job. I will bounce back soon, I smiled back at him. Every time he offered me a drink, I found a reason to delay it, or I would ceremonially just wet my lips. Some days I faked a stomach ache. Other days I claimed I was taking medication that could not be mixed with food. Kevin would not show any anger, just a light nod. But I noticed that every time I rejected him, his eyes would darken for a fraction of a second. It happened so fast that you would miss it if you were not paying close attention. I also started keeping a meticulous log. I recorded the times and frequencies he made me drinks, and even my own mild headaches. I was no longer ingesting anything from his hands, but I quietly maintained the log like a lawyer preparing for a trial without a set court date. After being discharged from the hospital, Chloe took an extended medical leave. Rumor had it she had suffered an acute nervous breakdown and required long-term psychiatric care. Kevin showed deep concern and sent her financial assistance as a show of solidarity. He spoke to me about it with a tone full of pity. Poor girl. She is still so young to be dealing with such severe issues. Fortunately, they caught it early. Hearing that sent a literal chill through my bones. That night, lying with my back to him, staring at the dark wall, 2 words echoed in my head. Caught it early. He specifically said they caught it early. Chloe collapsed after drinking my juice for exactly 1 week. If I had been the one drinking it, where would I be right now? In a hospital bed, or strapped down in an isolation room at a psychiatric rehab center, suffering uncontrollable panic attacks? And the person signing my commitment papers would have been Kevin. A few days later, something Kevin said made it painfully clear what phase of his plan we were in. I really do not think your mental state is doing well lately, he said, during dinner, his voice incredibly soft and measured. You are not sleeping, and you constantly zone out. Sometimes it looks like you do not even understand what I am saying. I am really worried. I set my utensils down and looked directly at him. What are you implying? That I am sick? He quickly smiled and waved his hand. No. I am not saying you are sick. It just reminds me a little of Chloe right before she had her episode. I just thought, for peace of mind, maybe you should get a comprehensive evaluation. Not for your sake, for mine. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. There it was. The first step on the path Emily had outlined for me. If I agreed to go to the doctor with him, everything would slowly fall into his hands in a completely legal, justifiable way. I took a deep breath and tried to keep my composure. I am not like Chloe. I am exhausted from work. The pressure from the new project is keeping me up at night, that is all. You are the one who is with me every day. You should understand that. He looked at me with an expression hovering between vigilance and tenderness. It is exactly because I am with you every day that I am scared. It is just a checkup. You have nothing to lose. I offered a paper-thin smile. If you are truly worried about me, let me handle it. If I feel it is necessary, I will go myself. I do not want to make a big deal out of nothing. Kevin stayed silent for a few seconds. His facial expression barely changed, but I clearly felt his patience being tested. That night, he did not pull me into his arms like he usually did. 2 days later, my mother-in-law, Eleanor, called me. Her voice on the other end of the line was laced with heavy anxiety. Sarah, Kevin mentioned you have been absolutely exhausted and cannot sleep lately. Is everything all right? I gripped the phone tightly, suddenly hit by a wave of cold. Kevin had started playing another card. The family. Yes, Eleanor. I think it is just stress from work, but I am fine. Eleanor sighed. I do not know much about medicine, honey, but if your own family is noticing changes in you, you need to be careful. Why not go see a doctor sometime? It would give me peace of mind, too. I am getting older. My biggest fear is something happening to you at home, and no one noticing. I bit my lip. Her voice was not malicious or calculating, but her genuine concern was exactly what Kevin was using to corner me. After hanging up, I sat on my bed for a long time, staring at my hands. Suddenly, a very clear realization washed over me. Kevin did not just want to turn me into a mental patient, he wanted to turn my entire family into his allies. In his scenario, no matter how loud I screamed, I would only look like a sick person in denial of her own illness. The next evening, I told Kevin, I am going to visit my mom this weekend. Her back has been bothering her a lot lately. Kevin looked slightly surprised. Why the sudden trip? Want me to drive you? I shook my head. If you are busy, just stay here. My mom just wants to see me. He looked at me uneasily, but eventually nodded. In his calculations, perhaps he felt I was still under his control, and there was no need to rush things. I drove to my mother's house and stayed the night. Lying next to her, listening to her soft breathing, smelling the familiar scent of her home, and hearing the ticking of the old grandfather clock, my heart softened, then immediately contracted in pain. If I truly ended up locked in a psychiatric ward one day, my mother would be the one who suffered the most. The next morning, while my mom was at the grocery store, I called Emily and arranged to meet her immediately. At her office, Emily observed me for a moment before getting straight to the point. "You need to be extremely careful. He is starting to pull your family into this." "I know. That is why I need another favor." Emily looked at me with a serious expression, not asking questions. "I need you to secretly run a complete, comprehensive medical and psychiatric evaluation on me. If necessary, I need an official record of my current mental state. I need irrefutable proof that I am entirely sane." Emily understood immediately. "All right. But I need you to promise me one thing. You still have the absolute cold nerve required to play this game to the very end. That man is not simple. And once you start fighting back, there is no going back." I looked at Emily, and said slowly, "From the moment he tried to turn me into a lunatic, there was no going back for me." Emily secured my test results in a safe file. Every single metric was perfectly normal. I had no neurological damage, no paranoia, and zero signs of clinical depression. I was simply a woman under pressure, but completely and entirely lucid. Having that document in my hands brought me relief, but also a suffocating sadness. I had to scientifically prove my own sanity before someone could slap a crazy label on me. When I returned home that evening, Kevin was waiting in the living room. On the coffee table sat a stack of documents. "I booked an appointment with a specialist for next week," he said, his voice lacking its previous warmth. "All the paperwork is ready." I stood before him. I had imagined this exact scenario countless times, but experiencing it in reality sent a piercing ache through my chest. "So you are just making decisions about my life for me?" I asked very quietly. Kevin stared me down. "I am only doing what is best for you." I smiled. This time, the smile was no longer a friendly mask, but something so cold it terrified even me. "Fine. Let us wait a bit. When the day comes, I will go with you. But what you think is best might not actually be what is best." Kevin was taken aback for a second, but quickly regained his usual composure. Suddenly, Emily's words echoed in my mind. "Once you start fighting back, there is no going back." I understood completely. The board was set. The following week, the atmosphere in the house grew incredibly bizarre. Kevin no longer showed impatience, but his guard was up. He took care of me with an attentiveness that would make any outsider think I was the luckiest woman in the world. In the morning, a glass of warm water waited on my nightstand. At night, a bowl of hot soup was ready on the dining table. Even when walking down the stairs, he stood closely behind me, extending an arm as if terrified I might trip. "You have been getting dizzy spells lately. We need to be careful," he would say. I nodded, playing the obedient wife. But inside, I knew his attentiveness did not stem from love, but from a paralyzing fear that I might slip out of his control. The day of the doctor's appointment arrived in a flash. Kevin had selected a highly reputable private psychiatric clinic. The night before, he fell asleep very early, but I stayed awake. In the dark, I listened to his rhythmic breathing. His inhales and exhales were as mechanical and perfectly regulated as a machine. I thought back to the early years of our marriage spent in this exact room. Back when I believed I was sleeping next to the safest man in my life. If someone had told me back then that Kevin would be the one to push me into the abyss, I would have laughed in their face. The next morning, Kevin drove me. We barely spoke. When he parked in front of the clinic, he turned and grabbed my hand tightly. "Do not be scared. I am right here with you." I looked into his eyes. At that moment, my heart trembled slightly, not out of emotion, but out of profound sorrow. This man could still utter the same sweet words as before, but behind them lay a cold-blooded conspiracy. "Yeah, I trust you," I replied. 3 slow, simple words, but I felt Kevin's hand stiffen. Perhaps he himself was caught off guard. The doctor we saw was not anyone I had ever consulted before. Kevin led me into the office of a younger, very serious-looking psychiatrist. He asked me a barrage of questions about my sleep, my emotions, panic attacks, and whether I ever heard strange voices. I answered slowly, appearing hesitant and moderate in my responses. Sometimes I told the truth, other times I deliberately left things vague. Sitting next to me, Kevin acted the part of the deeply concerned husband, constantly ready to jump in, add details, or correct my statements. The consultation ended with an appointment for a follow-up and a prescription for mild anti-anxiety medication. The patient is exhibiting symptoms of an anxiety disorder and severe insomnia. Close monitoring is required, the doctor said. Kevin maintained a grim expression as he took the prescription. Does she need to be committed for observation, doctor? The doctor shook his head. Not at that stage yet, but the family needs to supervise her strictly. I do not recommend leaving the patient alone for long periods. On the drive back, Kevin was completely silent. After passing a busy intersection, he suddenly spoke up. If this gets worse, I think you should be admitted for inpatient care under supervision. I turned to look at him. He was not looking at me. His eyes were glued to the road, his voice as monotonous as if he were discussing a corporate merger. I am still fine, I said. Kevin did not answer. That night, Eleanor called again. This time, her voice was not just worried, it carried a tone of grave seriousness. Sarah, Kevin told me you went to the doctor. Do you really need to be strictly supervised? It is just insomnia, Eleanor. Eleanor sighed. I am not blaming you, sweetheart. But health is not a game. You are Kevin's wife, a part of this family. If something is wrong, we have to deal with it properly. Kevin is so worried he has not slept in nights. I bit my lip. Kevin was a master manipulator. He did not need to say much or aggressively force my hand. He simply set the stage so others would voluntarily pressure me on his behalf. I understand, Eleanor. I will follow the doctor's orders, I said quietly. After hanging up, I sat silently in my room. Before, I might have felt guilty for causing others to worry. Now, I only saw the net closing around me with crystal clarity. Chloe entered Kevin's conversations once again. He mentioned that her family had transferred her to a different facility. Her physical condition is relatively stable, but mentally, she is still completely unstable. I listened in silence. Was Chloe truly sick? Or was she just acting the same way he was? I kept asking myself. One afternoon, I received a short text from Emily. Be careful. Someone has been asking around about your medical records. My heart pounded. I called her immediately, but Emily only said, I cannot talk long. I have handled it on my end, but you need to be on high alert. They are accelerating the timeline. I understood that Kevin taking me to that clinic was just step one of his accelerated plan. That night, I faked a panic attack. Trembling, I claimed I heard an invisible knocking on the door. I told him there was a stranger in the house spying on me. Kevin immediately pulled me into his arms, whispering words of comfort. But I noticed that the concern in his eyes was no longer genuine. It was laced with something resembling eager anticipation. After my episode, Kevin called the doctor in the middle of the night. He thought I was asleep and spoke in hushed tones, but I caught every single word. Yes, her symptoms are worsening rapidly. I think we need to prepare the paperwork for immediate involuntary commitment. I turned my back to him, tears streaming down my face. Not because I was hurt, but because the road ahead was no longer ambiguous. It was painted with terrifying clarity. The heavy doors of a psychiatric ward closing behind me. The next morning, Kevin came home holding a folder full of documents. He set it on the kitchen island and spoke slowly. I have spoken with the facility. With one final confirmation from the doctor, you can be admitted immediately. They will take much better care of you there. I looked at him, my voice shaking. What about my company? Kevin smiled. Do not worry. I will take care of everything regarding the business. Those words froze the blood in my veins. Take care of everything. To Kevin, my life was nothing more than a neat little file waiting to be archived. That night, I called my mother and lied, telling her I had to go on a business trip for a few days. I did not have the courage to tell her the truth. I was terrified that if she knew, she would panic, rush over, and walk straight into the trap Kevin had set. Before bed, Kevin placed a sleeping pill in my hand. Take this so you can get a good night's rest. I took the pill, stared at it for a moment, and swallowed. But the second he turned his back, I quietly walked into the bathroom and spit it out. I did not sleep a wink that night. I sat propped against the headboard, staring at Kevin sleeping soundly beside me. His sleeping face looked like that of a kind, peaceful, and devoted husband. Where did his true self hide? I wondered. Beneath that warm exterior, or inside the commitment papers he kept locked in his drawer? Right before dawn, I got a text from Emily. You need hard evidence. We are running out of time. I gripped my phone tightly. For the first time in days, I felt a strange mix of terror and terrifying resolve. If I hesitated, those asylum doors would lock tight. But if I moved too fast, everything could be ruined. I had to choose the perfect moment. And that moment was almost here. The next morning, Kevin woke up very early. He groomed himself meticulously, as if preparing for a major board meeting. Yet, he kept glancing at me, as if terrified I might vanish into thin air. I lay facing the wall, still pretending to be exhausted. When he leaned over and placed a hand on my shoulder, I shivered slightly, just enough for him to notice. "Still exhausted?" His voice was soft. "I feel a little dizzy," I said weakly. Kevin did not suspect a thing. In fact, he seemed impatient. He called the housekeeper, rattled off a list of instructions, and then turned back to me. "I have to meet with my lawyer for a bit today. You rest at home. Call me if you need anything." I nodded obediently, just like always. But the second the front door clicked shut, I bolted out of bed. My heart was racing. This was one of the few times Kevin had left the house after days of keeping me under strict surveillance. I knew my window of time was incredibly narrow. I called Emily immediately. My voice shook with tension. "Emily, Kevin is going to see his lawyer today. I think this is to finalize the commitment papers and power of attorney over my assets." Emily was silent for a few seconds before speaking firmly. "You need to secure at least one piece of direct evidence. A counter-medical report is not enough anymore." I bit my lip. Direct evidence. There was only one person who could provide that. Chloe. The only person who was simultaneously a victim and an accomplice. That afternoon, using my exhaustion as an excuse, I sent the housekeeper away, asking her to just bring dinner to my room later. I pulled out a prepaid SIM card I had hidden in a drawer, popped it into an old burner phone, and used it as my secret lifeline. I still had Chloe's number. She had called me a few times in the past, her tone often hovering between challenging and overly flattering. I sent her a short text. "I know everything. If you want to walk away cleanly, we have things to discuss." Nearly 30 minutes later, Chloe replied with one line. "Do not try anything crazy. I have nothing to do with this." I took a deep breath and typed back. "You are pregnant with Kevin's baby. The previous hospital no longer has your medical records on file." This time, she took much longer to reply. The message finally came through close to 9 p.m. "What do you want?" I knew I had hit her weak spot. I told her to meet me at a small, quiet diner on the outskirts of town. Kevin had lied about a late meeting, so I knew he would not notice my absence. I had factored everything into my calculations. If Kevin came home early, I would just slip out the back of the diner and rush home. When I arrived at the diner, I picked the most inconspicuous booth in the back. My hands were freezing, my back drenched in sweat. Chloe arrived almost 30 minutes late, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a face mask. She was gaunt, but her pregnant belly was clearly showing. She sat across from me, her eyes darting around nervously. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked sharply. I looked her dead in the eye and cut straight to the chase. "You faked a panic attack in the office, and then conveniently vanished from the hospital network. Did you really think I knew nothing?" Chloe paled. She bit her lip, stayed silent for a few seconds, then let out a bitter laugh. "You are the one who is actually sick. Even if I faked it, it has absolutely nothing to do with you." I placed my phone on the table and hit play on an audio recording of Kevin giving her instructions over the phone. Robert Harrison, a private investigator and old family friend, had helped recover it from a bug placed in Kevin's car. Kevin's voice came through loud and clear. "Put on a convincing show. Once we get past this, I will take care of you and our child." Chloe froze. I could clearly see her hands shaking. "I did not think you would be bold enough," I said slowly, "to know exactly what was in the juice he handed you." Chloe lowered her head, trembling from head to toe. After a while, she broke down crying, her voice cracking. "I had no choice. I was drowning in debt. The loan sharks had me cornered. Kevin promised that if I did him one favor, he would pay off my debts and guarantee me a comfortable life. I thought he just wanted to scare you. I never thought he would actually go through with it." I clenched my fists under the table. My chest tightened. "And did you know exactly what kind of drug it was?" I pressed. Chloe shook her head wildly, sobbing. "I only knew it was something that would cause long-term neurological damage and eventually drive you crazy. I was supposed to test it first, but the one he gave me was just a harmless placebo." I closed my eyes. The final puzzle piece snapped into place. "Chloe, I do not care if you truly love Kevin or not," I said, opening my eyes to stare her down. "But let me make one thing very clear. If I am locked away in a psychiatric ward, neither you nor the child in your womb will be safe. Once Kevin gets what he wants, he will throw you to the curb." Chloe looked horrified. She wrapped her arms around her stomach and cried harder. "Then what am I supposed to do?" I looked at her for a long time, then spoke quietly. If you testify for me, I will protect you and your child. If you stay silent, I guarantee you will take the fall for all of this completely alone." Chloe stopped crying. She nodded, her eyes filled with terror and absolute desperation. I activated the voice recorder on my phone and slid it to the center of the table. "Start from the beginning. Tell me everything." Between choked sobs, Chloe spilled it all. How she met Kevin. How he coached her to fake the breakdown in the office. How she was smuggled out of the hospital through off-the-books channels. Every single word she spoke stabbed into my heart. When she finished, I stopped the recording. There was no sense of victory, only a paralyzing, numbing cold. "Are you going to destroy both of us?" she asked, shivering. I stood up with terrifying composure. "If you are on my side, the only person I am going to destroy is him." On the drive back, the sky darkened, threatening a downpour. In the car, with trembling hands, I replayed the recording over and over. This was the final piece I needed. When I got home, Kevin was already there. He was sitting in the living room. He looked exhausted. But there was a strange, manic gleam in his eyes. "Where did you go?" he asked. I played confused. "I just stepped out to get some fresh air. I felt like I was suffocating in here." Kevin stared at me intensely for a few seconds, then smiled. "You are being admitted tomorrow. From now on, you are not allowed to go out alone." I gave a slight nod. My heart was hammering. Tomorrow was the day Kevin planned to lock me behind a door, with no exit. Lying next to him that night, I felt a storm raging inside me. The phone containing Chloe's confession was tucked right under my pillow. I knew I had exactly one day left to pave my road to freedom. Escape? Or be buried forever under the identity of a psychiatric patient? I barely slept. Kevin had draped an arm over my stomach, an intimate gesture from a husband who once loved his wife. But now, his touch only made my skin crawl. I lay motionless in the dark with my eyes open, listening to his breathing and feeling his slight movements, as if counting down the time I had left. Before dawn, Kevin woke up before me. He walked quietly, but I could feel his footsteps. Through half-closed eyes, I watched him stand by the bed, staring at me for a long time. His gaze was no longer worried, it was terrifyingly calm. Like someone contemplating a task that was finally about to be finished. "Sleep well," he whispered gently. I did not respond. As soon as the door closed, I allowed myself a deep breath. I knew today was the day of reckoning. If I let Kevin execute his plan and take me to that hospital, I would never walk out on my own 2 feet again. I quickly texted Emily. "Just like we talked about. Everything is set. They are taking me today." Less than a minute later, Emily called me. Her voice was firm and composed. "Robert and I are on our way to your house right now." Robert Harrison was an old friend of my late father, now working as a private investigator with deep ties to the police department. My father had relied on his help for corporate issues in the past. I never imagined I would one day be relying on him to escape my own marriage. At 9 a.m., Kevin returned. He was dressed in a sharp, dark suit, looking as if he were attending a major corporate signing ceremony. In his hand was the thick folder. "The car is waiting," he said in a gentle but uncompromising tone. I sat on the edge of the bed, pretending to be terrified. "I am scared, Kevin." Kevin stepped closer, taking my hands with a look of utmost tenderness. "It is just for a few days. Once you are better, I will come pick you up." I nodded and stood up incredibly slowly. I had only one thought in my head: stall for time. Every second counted. When we stepped into the living room, Kevin froze. Emily was sitting on the sofa. Next to her was Robert Harrison. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, was also there, looking deeply worried. Kevin stopped dead in his tracks, but quickly regained his facade. "Emily, what brings you all here so early in the morning?" Emily stood up, a cold smile on her face. "I came to take her for a second opinion. There are a few things I need to confirm." Kevin looked at me, a flash of high alert in his eyes. "I have already handled all the arrangements. There is no need to trouble anyone else." At that moment, Robert interjected, his voice heavy and authoritative. "Kevin, I have a few questions for you regarding your former secretary, Chloe." The air in the living room turned to ice. Kevin frowned slightly, but kept his tone steady. "Chloe is just a former employee who resigned due to illness. What does she have to do with anything happening today?" Emily placed her phone on the coffee table and hit play. Chloe's hoarse, crying voice filled the silence. Every word about the fake drugs, the blackmail, the money, Kevin's grand design, every confession, every sordid detail was laid bare. Eleanor had been holding a teacup. Her hands began to shake violently, spilling hot tea all over the table. She stared at Kevin with trembling lips. Kevin, is all of this true? Kevin stood frozen for several seconds. Then, he laughed. It was a dry, hollow laugh. That recording could easily be fabricated. Who knows who forced Chloe to say such ridiculous things? I took a step forward. My heart was pounding like a drum. Then what about this? I pulled out my own phone and played the audio from that night in his car. Kevin's voice rang out, unmistakable. Let her test it first. This one is a harmless placebo. The other one is the one who needs to go crazy. The room felt like it was caving in. Eleanor's face drained of all color. She stumbled and nearly collapsed. Emily rushed over to support her. Eleanor stared at Kevin, her voice cracking. Is it true? You really tried to destroy your own wife? Kevin clenched his fists, veins popping on his forehead. Robert opened his briefcase, pulling out a folder and a copy of the lab results. These are the toxicology reports from a sample of Chloe's hair. It contains traces of the exact same hallucinogenic neurotoxin found in the juice samples Sarah provided. And I have already spoken with the shady facility that managed her off-the-books transfer. The person who signed off on it is a very close business partner of yours. Kevin stared at the documents. His expression finally shattered. For the first time, I saw him truly panic. Kevin, say something? Eleanor sobbed. Do you even realize what you have done? You are destroying your own wife. Kevin looked at his mother, then at me. For a split second, a flicker of regret crossed his eyes, but it vanished instantly, replaced by stubborn defiance. So what? He spat, letting out a bitter laugh. She knew too much. I could not let her keep standing in my way. Those words twisted in my chest like a knife. Not because I was surprised, but because I had finally heard the truth straight from his mouth. Eleanor wailed. Oh my God. You have been putting on an act in front of me this entire time? Kevin. He did not answer. He turned his back to us. Emily stepped forward. Her voice calm but resolute. The evidence is overwhelming, Kevin. If you keep denying it, the only person going down is you. Kevin looked at all of us for a long moment. The light left his eyes, like a man who realized every single escape route had been cut off. Finally, he let out a long breath. Fine. I lose. But do you really think you won? He said, locking eyes with me. Do you think you get to just walk away and live peacefully? I stared right back at him. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt no fear. I just need to live as a whole human being, not as the lunatic in your twisted script. Outside, the wail of police sirens grew louder. Kevin flinched. Robert had called them in secret. Eleanor covered her face, weeping hysterically. Emily gripped my hand tightly. Her hand was warm, but shaking. I stood perfectly still, watching as the officers walked in and placed Kevin in handcuffs. I felt no joy. Only a bizarre, hollow emptiness. On the day we chose to get married, I never imagined our parting would look like this. They led him out to the cruiser. Before getting in, he turned back and looked at me one last time. In his eyes, I saw not only hatred but a crushing, humiliating defeat. The squad car disappeared past the garage doors. I stood motionless in the front yard. The wind bit at my skin. Eleanor collapsed behind me. I turned around and helped her up, my heart aching. I knew my battle was only half over. The legal fallout, and whatever happened to Chloe, were still waiting for me. After Kevin was taken away, the house we had shared felt incredibly empty. Everything was exactly the same. The sofa he used to sit on. The glass of milk he handed me every night. Even the faint lingering scent of his cologne in the closet. But the man who was once my husband was gone. Eleanor sat in a chair, her eyes vacant. Her hands were clutched tightly against her chest, as if she were terrified her heart might jump out of her throat. She wept silently, her shoulders shaking with choked sobs. I knelt before her and took her freezing, trembling hands. Eleanor, I am so sorry. She looked at me with bloodshot, swollen eyes. You have absolutely nothing to apologize for. This is Kevin's fault. He destroyed his own life. Her voice broke on the final word. Suddenly, in the eyes of this woman, I saw not just the agony of a mother who had lost her son, but the devastating regret of failing to see him slip into the darkness. Emily stayed by my side the entire afternoon. She helped Eleanor into a guest room, gave her a mild sedative, and made a bowl of warm chicken soup. Eleanor barely ate, just took a few sips of the broth and continued to cry. Every so often, she would squeeze my hand and plead. He made a terrible mistake, Sarah. But no matter what, he is your husband. What are you going to do now? I could not answer her. Because I honestly did not know myself. 3 days later, I was called in to give my official statement. The complete testimony, Chloe, the recordings, the toxicology reports, the illegal transfer documents, everything was laid out on the table like pieces of a stripped bare life with nowhere to hide. Chloe was there, too. She sat in the corner of the room. She was gaunt, her belly protruding, her face deathly pale. When our eyes met, she immediately looked down. She apologized repeatedly, like a terrified child clinging to her last shred of hope. Sarah, I have no one left. Kevin is in jail, and the loan sharks are hunting me down. I looked at Chloe with complicated feelings. I could not forgive her, but I also could not be ruthless enough to abandon a terrified, desperate pregnant woman. Tell the police the absolute truth. Let the law decide your fate. As for your child, if necessary, I will help however I can, I told her. Chloe buried her face in her hands. Her tears dripping onto the floor. I do not deserve your help, Sarah. I am not helping you because you deserve it. I am doing it because the baby is innocent, I replied. After giving my statement, I experienced, for the very first time, what true, absolute exhaustion felt like. It was not physical fatigue, it was the exhaustion of someone who had just walked the razor's edge between life and death. I went home, threw myself onto the bed, and stared blankly at the white ceiling for hours. That night, Eleanor came into my room and sat quietly on the edge of the bed. Do you hate him very much? She asked softly. I stayed silent for a moment before answering. At first, I did. I hated him so much I wanted to erase every single year we spent together. But now, I just feel pain. Eleanor cried. I gave birth to him. I raised him. And I cannot believe it. I cannot believe I raised a monster. I took her hand and squeezed it gently. The woman sitting before me was no longer my mother-in-law. She was just a mother who had lost her son in the most agonizing way imaginable. A week later, my lawyer came over to handle the assets and the divorce proceedings. Kevin had been indicted, and all our joint assets were frozen pending the investigation. I signed the divorce papers with a strange numbness. No tears, no trembling. Just the profound grief of holding something shattered in my hands, knowing it was utterly beyond repair. As I signed, Eleanor stood next to me, her lips pressed tightly together. When I finished, she suddenly spoke. You should keep this house. I do not want anything. I do not have the face to fight you for a single dime. I shook my head. These are joint assets. I will not take anything that is not rightfully mine. And Eleanor, even though I am no longer Kevin's wife, I will always be your daughter-in-law. She gripped my hands and sobbed, looking like a mother who had just lost her own daughter. Chloe was granted bail due to her pregnancy but placed under strict surveillance. She came to see me one last time. She was even thinner, her eyes still holding that terrified look, but the deceit was gone. After I deliver the baby, I am moving abroad. I do not have the courage to stay here, she said. Do you still resent me? I looked at her and answered slowly. The day you decided to do what you did, you should have considered the consequences. But we are at the end of the road now, and I do not want to carry this resentment anymore. From now on, live an honest life. Consider that your way of paying off your debt to yourself. Chloe buried her face in her hands, crying silently. A month later, I moved out of the house. I did not have the strength to keep living in a place that used to be a home but was now filled with ghostly memories. Emily helped me find a small apartment near the hospital. Eleanor did not return to her hometown. She wanted to stay in the city to check on me and wait for news regarding Kevin's trial. On my first night in the new apartment, I stood out on the balcony for a long time, watching the river of headlights in the city traffic below, feeling the cold wind. For the first time, I felt the word freedom with absolute clarity. Freedom. But also profound loneliness. For several nights, I still woke up in a panic. Dreaming of golden juice, Chloe's screams, and Kevin's dead, icy stare. But every time I woke up, I reminded myself. It is over. The scars remain, but I survived. One afternoon while I was at work, I received a text from an unknown number. Just one line. Think you won? A chill ran through my body. I did not need to see a name to know who it was from. Emily saw my pale face and asked worriedly. Kevin? I nodded, feeling an unspeakable anxiety growing in my chest. I knew that even though Kevin was locked up behind bars, the bond of hatred between us was not fully severed. I also understood that my life moving forward would not be as peaceful as it once was. But this time, I was no longer the naive woman waiting to be led to the slaughter. I had learned how to stand my ground in the eye of the storm. Kevin's message haunted me all night. I knew he was being held in pretrial detention, but I could not help wondering if he still had people operating on the outside. The unsevered ties made the fragile peace I had just found wobble violently. Emily immediately urged me to notify Robert. The next morning, I took my phone to the precinct. Robert inspected it and grimaced. This is not a standard contraband phone text. He has someone on the inside facilitating his communications. You need to be far more vigilant from now on. I nodded. What I felt was no longer just fear, but a cold, calculating hyper-awareness. I knew a man who tried to destroy his wife to take everything would not accept defeat so easily. Over the next few days, I completely altered my routine. I went to work at different times, came home early, and never went out alone at night. Emily often came over to sleep at my place. Eleanor also moved into my new apartment, taking the spare bedroom. She did not say much, but every morning she woke up early to cook a warm breakfast. The woman who once lived in a wealthy suburban estate now quietly took care of her daughter-in-law, just as she had once taken care of her son. One afternoon, as the two of us were peeling fruit, Eleanor spoke softly. I went to visit him. My hand stopped. How is he doing? She sighed. He has lost weight, but his eyes are still so sharp. He asked about you. Asked if you were living peacefully. I did not know what to say. I stayed silent. Deep down, I felt a strange pang. Regardless of everything, Kevin was once my husband. There were years when he truly loved me. Or at least, years when I believed he did. I just told him you were doing fine. I did not want him obsessing over you anymore, she continued, her voice catching. But before I left, he looked dead at me and said just one thing. She gripped the fabric of her shirt. She will not last long. A sharp pain shot through my chest. I knew Kevin had not let me go. That night, I turned off the lights to go to sleep. Right at that moment, the doorbell rang. In the dead silence of the apartment, the sound was piercing and terrifying. Emily jolted awake and grabbed my hand. Eleanor also woke up in a panic. Who is it? At this hour? She whispered, trembling. I looked through the peephole. Standing outside was a stranger wearing a baseball cap pulled down low, his head bowed. I signaled to Emily not to open the door. The man waited for a moment, then knocked harder. Delivery, ma'am. I did not answer. A few minutes later, he walked away. Through the building's security camera app, I watched him drop a manila envelope on the welcome mat and hurry off. Emily called the building security. When the guards brought the envelope up, there was only one thing inside. A photograph. It was a picture from our wedding day. My face had been violently scratched out with a red pen, the ink gouged into the paper like claw marks. On the back, it read, "It is not over." Eleanor saw the photo, clutched her chest, and began to hyperventilate. Emily rushed over and administered a sedative. I stood frozen like a statue. The terror was still there, but this time, it was mixed with white-hot anger. I called Robert immediately. He came over that night and took the envelope as evidence. He looked at me for a long time and said, "Brace yourself. A cornered animal does not always give up. Some get far more reckless than you could ever imagine." I nodded. I understood that better than anyone. A few days later, Chloe gave birth to a baby boy. The news reached me on a morning of torrential rain. I received it with a heavy heart. A new life was brought into this world, but it was already burdened by the dark sins of the adults. I got a text from Chloe. "He is here. A healthy baby boy. Thank you for everything." I did not reply. Under the circumstances, I had no idea what to say. That night, I had a dream. I was standing in a long, dark corridor. Kevin stood behind a heavy iron door. He looked at me, smiled his gentle smile, and said, "Wait for me." I jolted awake in a cold sweat. Outside, the rain was still pouring. Every drop felt like a hammer striking my chest. The next morning, as I was washing my face, my phone rang. It was the state penitentiary. A gruff male voice spoke. "Kevin is requesting a visitation with you. He says it is regarding a matter directly related to his case." My hands shook. Next to me, Emily stared at me without blinking. "I will not tell you whether you should go or not. But if you do, you need to be mentally prepared. A man like him never speaks without a reason." I stayed silent for a long time. Finally, I nodded. That afternoon, I drove to the prison. The walk to the visitor's entrance was cold and echoing. Through the thick plexiglass, I saw Kevin. He looked even more emaciated, but his eyes were still dark and piercing. When he saw me, his lips curled into a bizarre, twisted smile. "Still alive and kicking. Huh?" he asked. I looked at him calmly. If you wanted to apologize, you did not need to drag me all the way down here. Kevin let out a low chuckle. Apologize? Did you really think I called you here just to say sorry? He leaned closer to the glass and dropped his voice. I just wanted to tell you one thing, what you have seen, what you think you have won. It is all just scratching the surface. There are things in this world that a judge's gavel cannot solve. My heart was racing, but I refused to let it show. Are you threatening me? Kevin stared me down, his eyes turning pitch black. I am warning you to watch out for the people you trust. Especially Emily. The words hit me like an ice pick. I was stunned, but I kept my voice perfectly steady. You no longer have the right to speak about anyone in my life. Kevin laughed out loud, the sound echoing through the empty visitation room. The day will come when you understand. And when that day comes, you will miss me. I stood up without another word. I could not let him see me cry. To this man, every single tear I shed was a victory. When I walked out of the prison, I stood in front of the cold iron gates for a long time, taking deep breaths of the freezing air. Kevin's words echoed in my head. Watch out for the people you trust. Especially Emily. I did not want to believe it, but he had planted the seed of doubt. And I knew this storm was far from over. The drive back from the prison felt like I was carrying boulders in my head. Watch out for the people you trust. Especially Emily. I refused to believe it. During my darkest days, Emily was my absolute pillar of strength. The one who held my hand through the panic attacks, the one who pulled me out of Kevin's trap. But I also could not entirely brush off the words of a man like him. When I got home, Emily was in the kitchen making dinner. The smell of hot chicken broth and herbs filled the apartment with warmth. Seeing me, she turned around and smiled. Welcome back. How was the visit? I looked at her, and for a split second, I felt like I was looking at a complete stranger. But it was only a split second. Then, her familiar face returned. He just said some incredibly unpleasant things, I replied, avoiding her gaze. Emily set a bowl of hot soup on the table and pulled out a chair for me. Men like him, the more they fail, the more they spout nonsense to mess with your head. Do not let it get to you. I nodded, but my mind was in absolute turmoil. That night, I pretended to go to bed early. Once I confirmed Emily had gone into her own room, I quietly got up and turned on the burner phone I used for secret communications. I went through every single message and call log from the past few months. Ultimately, I found nothing overtly suspicious about Emily. There were just a few very brief calls to an unknown number. Mostly late at night, and very infrequent. I did not have the courage to jump to conclusions, so I just filed it away in my mind. A few days later, Robert called. I need you to come down and supplement your statement. We have some new details regarding Chloe's illegal hospital transfer. I went to the precinct the next morning. Chloe was there, too. Having just given birth, she looked incredibly frail, her face haggard and lined. When she saw me, she bowed her head. During that session, I learned something crucial. Aside from Kevin, there was an intermediary who bridged the gap between him and the black market medical network. This person used a prepaid phone and communicated with extreme caution. The police had not yet identified them. As I walked outside, Chloe stopped me, her voice raspy. Sarah. The night before I gave birth, a woman called me. She asked if I still had the recordings of Kevin. My heart hammered. A woman? Do you know her? Chloe shook her head. No. But her voice was completely calm. She told me not to hand anything over to the police, or else my child's future would not be safe. I froze. It was a highly sophisticated threat. What did you say to her? I asked. Chloe shivered. I hung up immediately and changed my number. I left the police station carrying an anxiety that was crystallizing into absolute terror. Kevin was behind bars under strict surveillance. So, who was this woman? How did she know about the recordings? And why target the child directly? When I got home that evening, Emily was not there. Eleanor told me she had been called in for an emergency shift at the hospital. I nodded, but a vague, ominous feeling washed over me. I walked into Emily's room. Everything was perfectly neat, as always. Her white coat hung on the back of the door, and several medical textbooks sat on the nightstand. I did not want to be a paranoid person, but almost on pure instinct, my hand reached out and opened her nightstand drawer. Inside, I saw a secondary cell phone, not the one Emily usually used. I picked it up. There was no passcode. A second later, I checked the recent call logs. The contact was saved under a bizarre symbol. I felt my stomach drop into a bottomless well. I did not have the courage to open the text messages. I put the phone exactly back where it was and closed the drawer as if nothing had happened. My entire body was shaking. In my mind, two images superimposed themselves over one another. Kevin, smiling coldly behind the prison glass, and Emily, standing in my kitchen making me warm soup. Emily came home very late that night. She looked exhausted. The second she walked in, she collapsed onto the sofa. It was an insanely long code blue, she sighed. I played it perfectly normal, handing her a glass of water. You must be exhausted. Emily smiled and patted my head, just like she always did. A little. But seeing you makes me feel better. That affectionate gesture made my skin crawl. Not because it was strange, but because it was too intimate. So intimate that I could no longer tell what was real and what was a lie. A few days later, I received the official notice that Kevin's trial was set for the following month. I shared the news with Eleanor. Hearing it, she quietly walked over to a framed photograph of her late husband on the mantel and lit a small memorial candle. As tears rolled down her cheeks, she whispered, "If your father knew about this from the other side, how disappointed in you would he be, Kevin?" I did not say a word. I knew the upcoming trial was not just the legal conclusion for Kevin, but the definitive, final burial of the marriage I once believed in. That night, a message from an unknown number appeared on my phone. "Want to know the truth about Emily?" Before I could reply, a second message came through. 3 p.m. tomorrow. The usual cafe near the hospital. Come alone. I stared at the screen, feeling my pulse throb in my neck. I knew I was standing in front of a new door. Behind it, either a truth that would destroy me awaited, or another, even more ruthless trap. The next morning, I lied to Emily, telling her I had to meet with my divorce attorney. She looked at me for a split second, then nodded. "Be careful out there." I arrived at the cafe on time. It was the same small, quiet place as always. I picked a table by the window. At exactly 3 p.m., a woman walked in. She was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and oversized sunglasses that covered most of her face. She sat across from me and took off the sunglasses. It was Robert Harrison's ex-wife. I felt like someone had violently seized my heart. The woman looked at me with a bitter smile. "Kevin was not playing this game alone, Sarah. And Emily is not as innocent as you think she is." It took me several seconds to find my voice. "What do you mean?" The woman lowered her voice. "Emily was the first person to detect the anomaly in your juice sample. But she was also the one who held back a portion of that sample and deliberately chose not to submit it all to the police." I sat frozen, stiff as a board. "That is impossible." She tilted her head, her gaze full of implication. "Think about it. A doctor as brilliant as Emily. If she was completely innocent, why are several crucial details of this case still medically murky in the DA's files to this day?" I sat paralyzed in silence. A ringing started in my ears, as if all the ambient noise in the cafe had been sucked into a vacuum. The woman stood up. "The truth is never easy to swallow. You should ask yourself, who actually benefited the most from this entire ordeal?" She walked out, leaving me entirely alone in the empty cafe, feeling as if my chest had been ripped open. In my mind, Emily's face surfaced with cruel, agonizing clarity. Her hand resting on mine. Her embrace when I was broken. Her soothing voice on the nights I was consumed by despair. If what that woman said was true, how colossally blind had I been to the people around me? I picked up my phone and stared at Emily's name in my contacts. I suddenly realized that this game might never have just been between Kevin and me. And the person making the final moves on the chessboard might have been sitting much closer than I ever imagined. I walked out of the cafe like a robot. The afternoon sky was overcast and gray, the freezing wind whipping at my ears, but I felt absolutely nothing. The woman's words echoed heavily and painfully in my skull. Emily held back a portion of the sample. She deliberately chose not to submit it all to the police. I did not want to believe it. I did not have the courage to believe it. Because if it was true, it meant that while I thought I was being rescued, I was actually just being guided through another, vastly more sophisticated maze. It was dark by the time I got home. Emily was in the kitchen doing the dishes. Hearing the door, she turned around and smiled. "Welcome back. How did it go with the lawyer?" I stared at her for a long time. For the first time, I had to exert maximum effort to suppress my emotions, keeping my face entirely rigid. That smile. It had been so deeply familiar to me for years. If it was all a fake, I no longer knew what the truth looked like. "Fine," I replied, my voice dry. I barely touched my food that night. Emily asked if I was feeling sick. I just shook my head. Eleanor watched me carefully. She noticed the strange look in my eyes but did not pry. After everyone went to sleep, I quietly opened my phone and sent Robert a very brief text. Robert, I suspect Emily. I need you to investigate her. Less than 10 minutes later, Robert called me. His voice was incredibly heavy. Explain. I recounted every detail. The meeting at the cafe, the strange burner phone in her drawer, the late-night call logs, and his ex-wife's words. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Do not let on that you know anything, he finally said. We do not have the full picture yet. But if she is truly involved, she is not an amateur. I know, I whispered, my heart shrinking. From that day on, I started acting in a brand new play. This time, the co-star was Emily herself. I acted perfectly normal. I ate with her, chatted with her, and even let her take care of me, just like before. But on the inside, I had erected an invisible fortress. I scrutinized every word she spoke and every move she made through a completely different lens. 3 days later, Emily told me she had to go out of state for a short medical conference. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and terror. The second she left, I had Robert come over to search her room. Robert went through every drawer and every piece of electronics with forensic precision. The burner phone I had seen in her nightstand was gone. Robert frowned, his expression grim. She had enough time to dispose of it. I collapsed onto the edge of the bed, my heart hammering so fast I felt dizzy. My suspicions were no longer baseless paranoia. That night, Robert had a contact tail Emily from a distance. 2 days later, he called me. His voice hit like a ton of bricks. Brace yourself. Emily has been in contact with Kevin's personal defense attorney. I held my breath. We do not have the audio, but a massive sum of money was just wired through an offshore intermediary into an account under the name of Emily's relative. It looks like a payoff. Hush money. I felt like I was suffocating. It was not just Kevin. The person I trusted the most in the world was also a part of that network. When Emily returned, she carried that same aura of exhaustion. Just like always, she brought back fresh fruit from her trip. I saw these and thought of you, she said with a warm smile. I took them and smiled back, but on the inside, every single fiber of my trust had quietly shattered into dust. I did not sleep that night. I waited until Emily was in a deep sleep, then quietly turned on a hidden microcamera Robert had installed in the living room. Around 2 a.m., Emily stepped out of her room. She was walking on tiptoes, holding her cell phone. She stood out on the balcony for a long time. I could not hear what she was saying, but I watched her nod and shake her head repeatedly. She leaned against the railing, listening intently to whoever was on the other line. When the call ended, she stood frozen for a moment before slipping back into her room. I clutched my blanket, tears silently falling before I even realized I was crying. Not because I was hurt, but because the last remaining ruins of my faith in humanity had just been vaporized. The next morning, I confronted Emily with the exact same demeanor I had used with Kevin. Only one thing was different. This time, I was not running away. Emily, I called out to her. Who were you talking to on the balcony last night? Emily froze for a split second. But she recovered her composure with lightning speed. Just family. Personal stuff. I stared dead into her eyes. Which family? Your entire family lives right here in the city. Emily looked uncomfortable and forced a smile. Maybe an old acquaintance named Kevin? I asked point blank. Emily's face drained of color. She stayed silent. To me, that silence was the loudest, clearest answer. You took his money, didn't you? My voice was hoarse. Emily lowered her head for a moment, then burst into tears. Do you think doctors like me do not have moments of weakness? She choked out between sobs. I was drowning in debt. My ex-husband walked out on me, and I had to raise my kid and put him through college all by myself. Kevin promised that if I just held back a fraction of the sample as a last resort for him, he would guarantee my son's tuition in full. I was wrong. But I never thought it would go this far. I sat down, feeling the strength drain completely from my body. You know damn well that if I had actually been locked in that psych ward, my life would have been over, I said. Every word felt like tearing open a wound. Emily covered her face, sobbing hysterically. I know. I am so sorry. But at the time, I really thought Kevin just wanted to scare you into handing over the assets. I never thought he actually meant to destroy you. I stood up. For the first time, I had to summon every ounce of willpower I possessed just to maintain my composure in front of the woman I once considered my savior. Emily, the moment you decided to hide that sample, you betrayed me. From here on out, I said slowly, I will let the law judge your excuses. That very day, I handed all the new evidence over to Robert and the district attorney. Emily was brought in for questioning. As she was escorted away, she looked back at me with eyes full of regret and despair. "I am so sorry." I did not reply. Some things, once broken, can never be fixed, no matter how many apologies are spoken. That night, I sat alone in the quiet apartment. Eleanor had gone back to her hometown for a few days to clear her head. I stared at the room that was once my sanctuary, now feeling as empty as my own soul. The storm did not just come from our enemies. It came from the very people we placed our absolute trust in. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You did the right thing. This game is almost over." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I knew the upcoming trial would not only put an end to Kevin's chapter, but it would rip the masks off everyone who had been hiding in the dark. The trial was set on a morning of freezing drizzle. I woke up very early and stood in front of the mirror for a long time. The woman staring back at me was thin, with an undeniable exhaustion in her eyes, but beneath that exhaustion was something forged in iron. I knew today was not just the day Kevin stood before a judge, it was the day I officially closed a massive, agonizing chapter of my life. Eleanor had arrived from her hometown the night before. She barely slept, sitting vigil by my side through the night. In the morning, she squeezed my hand. "Do not be afraid. No matter what happens, I am right here," she said in a gravelly voice. I nodded. It hit me then that the woman I had quietly avoided for years, my mother-in-law, was the one person who had consistently stayed by my side. I arrived at the courthouse with Robert. It was raining and freezing outside, and the atmosphere inside the courtroom was thick and suffocating. Chloe appeared as a witness. She clutched a small purse to her chest, gaunt and terrified. Her baby was with Child Protective Services or a relative. Emily was there, too. When she saw me, she did not even have the courage to meet my eyes, simply bowing her head. I did not avoid looking at her, but I did not seek her out either. Between us, there was no longer any blame, just a frozen, dead void. Kevin was brought in last. He wore an orange jumpsuit and had lost even more weight, but his posture was still impeccably straight. When our eyes met, he paused for a fraction of a second, then pressed his lips together and looked away. There was not a single ounce of remorse in his eyes. Only the bitter resignation of defeat and suppressed rage. The trial commenced. All the evidence was presented. The toxicology reports. The illegal transfer paperwork. The recorded phone calls between Kevin and Chloe, and Kevin and Emily. And Emily's own confession regarding the tampered evidence. Every single detail dropped like the blow of a sledgehammer. They called Chloe to the stand. Speaking through sobs, she recounted everything from the moment she met Kevin, to him blackmailing her, to being forced to execute his plot. When she spoke about her newborn baby, her voice broke. "I made a terrible mistake. But my baby is innocent." The courtroom fell dead silent. Next was Emily. She took the stand, her face ashen. Every word of her confession slashed at my heart and her own medical ethics like shards of broken glass. When the judge asked if she had anything to say to the victim, she turned to me, her eyes brimming with tears. "I am sorry. I did not deserve to be your friend, and I did not deserve to be your doctor." I did not nod, and I did not shake my head. I just sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead. Finally, Kevin stood up with terrifying composure. "I admit to all the charges brought against me. But I am not sorry." A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. Eleanor gripped the wooden bench in front of her to keep from collapsing, shaking uncontrollably. Kevin turned toward me, and continued slowly. "My only regret is that I failed." A chilling shudder violently ran down my spine. At that moment, I realized this man never once considered himself guilty. He was only wounded by the fact that he did not achieve his ultimate goal. The verdict was handed down almost 3 hours later. Kevin was convicted of multiple felonies, including attempted murder and conspiracy, and received a heavy maximum security prison sentence. Emily's medical license was permanently revoked, and she was handed a suspended sentence with years of probation and mandatory community service. Chloe received a reduced sentence in exchange for her full cooperation and her status as a new mother. When the judge struck the gavel, the courtroom exhaled a breath. It felt like it had been holding for months. The bailiffs led Kevin away. As he passed my table, he stopped for a second. The physical space between us was inches, but it felt like an impenetrable chasm. "You won," he said quietly. I looked at him. For the first time, I answered him with absolute, crystal clear calm. "No. You lost to yourself." Kevin froze for a second before the bailiffs shoved him forward. Eleanor collapsed into the aisle. I held her tight as she sobbed like a child. "I thought giving him life was my greatest joy," she wept. I never knew it would be my greatest tragedy. I did not know what to say. I just held her as tightly as I could. Over the next few days, the story dominated the local news cycle. The tabloids dubbed it the toxic juice plot, a Century City exec's plan to gaslight his wife for millions. I chose to remain completely silent. I was bone tired. Chloe came to see me one last time with her baby. The infant was sleeping soundly. I looked at the child with a heavy heart. I am moving out of state, she said. I do not have the courage to stay here anymore. I nodded. Between her and me, there would always be the shared memory of a nightmare. Emily reported to her probation officer. Before she did, she sent me a letter. I did not open it immediately. It contained apologies from someone I no longer had the energy to read. One afternoon, I went with Eleanor to the cemetery to visit her late husband's grave. She stood in front of the headstone for a long time, crying silently. I failed, honey. I failed to raise our boy right. Standing behind her, listening to the bitter wind, I realized that every single person in this story was a victim in their own way. But that did not erase the sins they committed. A month later, I sold my apartment and moved to a different city to start completely over. Eleanor did not come with me. She said she needed to stay near the state penitentiary, where Kevin was locked up. On the day I left, she held my hands. From now on, live for yourself. Do not let the debts of this family chain you down anymore. I hugged her, my tears soaking into her shoulder. Sitting on the train taking me far away from the city, I watched the familiar streets blur into the distance. The agonizing memories were left behind, too. They did not disappear, but they no longer had the power to suffocate me. I did not know what the future held. But I was alive. I had the chance to rebuild from the ashes. And that alone was a stroke of incredible luck. My new city welcomed me with a windy morning and a pale sun that was neither too hot nor too bleak. Much like my own state of mind. I rented a unit in a historic brownstone with a balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. For the first time in years, I was truly living alone. No Kevin, no surveillance cameras, no metallic-smelling juice. Just me and the quiet. For the first few days, I barely spoke to anyone. I took a job at a boutique design studio, came home, cooked simple meals, read books, and slept. Life moved at a glacial pace, and sometimes, the sheer silence terrified me. Some nights, I still dreamt of Kevin. I would wake up drenched in sweat, but I told myself it was just the debris of the past. Eleanor called every now and then. I visit him every month, she told me once. He is not arrogant anymore. But he barely speaks. I think he is not at peace with it either. I did not reply. I no longer had the capacity to feel pity or anger toward Kevin. One day, I finally opened the letter Emily sent. She wrote about her downfall, the judgment from her former peers, and the agonizing remorse that kept her awake at night. I pray that you keep moving forward and live your life to the absolute fullest, she wrote. Please just treat what I did to you as a nightmare that has finally passed. I folded the letter. I felt no rage. Only a profound sorrow for a woman who had destroyed her own life. As time went by, my work stabilized. I began to find my footing. One day, Robert called. How are you holding up, kid? I am good, Robert. Thank you. I have some news about Kevin, he said, his tone heavy. He is requesting a visitation. With you. My heart did not spiral into a panic, but it did skip a beat. The choice is entirely yours, Robert said. But I think you are strong enough now to face him if you need to. I hung up and thought about it. If I went to see Kevin, it would be the absolute final time I ever let my past touch my present. The next morning, I texted Robert. I will see him. A week later, I flew back. The drive to the maximum security prison was as gray and freezing as I remembered. But this time, I walked the path with a steady heartbeat. Behind the glass, Kevin looked like a ghost of his former self. He was emaciated, his eyes utterly exhausted. Thank you for coming, he said. Say what you need to say, I replied, perfectly calm. I am not asking for your forgiveness. I know I lost the right to ask for that a long time ago, he said after a long pause. I just wanted to tell you something. It wasn't until I ended up in here that I finally felt fear. Fear of myself. I said nothing. I thought that if I erased you from the equation, my life would be perfect. But when I lost everything, I realized I lost infinitely more than I ever calculated. I looked at him and felt only the faintest trace of melancholy, the kind you feel when looking at the cold ashes of a burnt-out fire. Nothing you say now changes anything, I told him. I know. I just did not want you to spend the rest of your life carrying the weight of hating me. I looked him dead in the eye. Do not worry. I do not hate you anymore. But I do not feel anything for you, either. Kevin slowly closed his eyes. A single tear tracked down his hollow cheek. I stood up. This is the last time I will ever come here. From today on, our lives are permanently severed. He did not try to stop me. When I walked out of the prison doors, I took a massive, deep breath. The sky was overcast, but it was not raining. I felt as if a heavy, rusted padlock around my chest had finally snapped open. That night, back in my small apartment, I opened the balcony doors to let the breeze in. I brewed a hot cup of tea and sat watching the amber city lights reflect against my bare walls. For the first time in years, I felt genuine, unadulterated peace. No one was watching me. No one was manipulating me. No one was dictating my destiny. Just me, a woman who had crawled through the wreckage and learned how to breathe again. And even if the road ahead was not going to be easy, I knew this time, I would be walking it entirely on my own 2 feet. And for me, that was more than enough. Life forces us down paths where we must wade through tears, terror, and absolute despair, just to understand one simple truth. No one can live our lives for us, and absolutely no one has the right to control our destiny, but ourselves. My life was thrown into the abyss of betrayal, pushed to the razor-thin border of sanity and madness by the very people I trusted the most. I was someone who could never escape. Someone I thought was weak and compliant. But in the end, I stood back up, not by a miracle, but by something deeply, fiercely human. Realization. When the dust settled, I understood that suffering is not as terrifying as choosing to live inside it forever. Hatred is not as terrifying as allowing it to slowly devour your soul day by day. What saved me was not revenge, but the decision to let go. The decision to walk out of the darkness at the exact right moment, while I still had the strength to walk toward the light. This world is full of people with friendly faces and calculating hearts. It is full of traps disguised as love and care. But through it all, the most critical thing is defending your own boundaries. If you take anything away from my story, let it be this. Never surrender your destiny entirely to anyone, no matter how close they are to you. Trust is necessary, but blind faith is lethal. Always listen to your intuition. Because sometimes, a faint flutter of unease is the very first warning sign of a catastrophic storm. Life taught me that crawling out of the wreckage does not make you weak, it makes you forged in fire. We cannot choose where we are born, or the trials that are thrown at us, but we absolutely can choose how we face them. No matter how deep the trauma goes, do not let it chain down the rest of your life. Before you even consider forgiving others, learn to forgive yourself first. If you are currently in a relationship that makes you feel terrified, suffocated, controlled, or stripped of your own identity, please, stop. Have the courage to look at the truth staring you in the face and walk away. No one is born to be a victim. You have the fundamental right to live safely, freely, and in peace. Do one small thing for yourself today. Listen to your own heart. If you are still afraid, find someone to share it with. If you are stuck, find a different way out. Do not wait until it is too late. Because true happiness is not depending on someone else to exist. True happiness is being strong enough to stand on your own 2 feet.